Okay, our session today is our fourth session in the series. We're almost getting close to the midpoint of the group F. Welcome, Manal. And Manal's session is on the infrastructure section, and just so happens, looking at your bio, Manal, I wasn't aware that you were a network engineer, so this is right up your alley. Thank you so much for joining us again. The session today will be talking about GAC, the Government Advisory Committee of ICANN. So welcome, Nell, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Glenn and Alfredo, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be with you today at the virtual school on internet governance. Our session today, as Glenn mentioned, will focus on governments and internet governance, taking the Governmental Advisory Committee of ICANN as an example. There is no doubt that the wide use of the internet, the emergence of new technologies, the need for national plans and strategies for digital transformation and digital inclusion have all prompted the governments, politicians, and regulators to the internet and increased their interest in its governance. But governments are not the only stakeholder in that respect, and accordingly, today we will focus on ICANN's Governmental Advisory Committee, the GAC, and its involvement within ICANN's multi-stakeholder ecosystem and its relationship with other parts of the community. So let's start by a quick introduction on ICANN. If we can go to the following slide, please. Thank you very much. And I know you already you are aware of ICANN and its structure from previous modules, but I think a quick refresher may be useful, particularly in relation to where the GAC fits within the overall ICANN ecosystem. So quickly on ICANN's mission on the following slide. Per ICANN bylaws, ICANN's mission is to ensure the stable and secure operation of the Internet's unique identifier systems. And in that, ICANN coordinates the allocation and assignment of names in the root zone of the domain name system, coordinates the development and implementation of policies concerning the registration of second-level domain names in generic top-level domains, facilitates the coordination of the operation and evolution of the DNS root name server system, coordinates the allocation and assignment at the topmost level of Internet protocol numbers and autonomous system numbers, and collaborates with other bodies as appropriate to provide registries needed for the functioning of the Internet as specified by Internet Protocol Standards Development Organizations. So moving to the following slide, and this is a quick representation of the ICANN ecosystem, which is made up of three components: the ICANN community, the ICANN board of directors, and the ICANN organization. As you can see, the board comprises 20 members, 16 voting directors, and 4 non-voting liaisons. There is the chairman of the board, 8 members nominated by the nominating committee, 2 coming from the address supporting organization, 2 from the country code names supporting organization, 2 from the generic names supporting organization, 1 from at large, and the 4 liaisons come from the GAC, Engineering Task Force, the Security Stability Advisory Committee, and the root server system advisory committee. So I'm trying to expand any acronym I use. I know ICANN is normally they use a lot of acronyms, and please, if I miss any of the acronyms, just let me know. In that, ICANN works through an open, transparent, consensus-driven, bottom-up, multi-stakeholder policy development process. And the community develops the policies through a bottom-up consensus-based policy development process, and ICANN board reviews and adopts the policies developed by the community and directs ICANN organization to implement them and oversees the performance of the organization. As for the organization, when we say the organization, we mean ICANN staff, and I think they are around 400 or 450 employees, and they support the work of the community and implement the adopted policies. Moving to the following slide, and this is just to note that all parts of the ICANN community are divided into two supporting organizations and advisory committees. And supporting organizations, the three of them are responsible for developing policy recommendations in the areas they represent. And the advisory committees, the four of them, they give advice to the board on recommendations presented to the board for adoption. I will not get into the details of the names. We've already mentioned them during the previous slide, and you have them for your own reading. So I think we can go directly now to the GAC. And I'll be zooming more into the GAC, and we will get to know about its membership, its role, its working methods and activities, and so on. So can we go to the following slide? And please, if you have any questions on the ICANN part, I'm pausing to check if there are any questions. If not, then if we go to the following slide. Thank you. So as we mentioned, the GAC stands for the Governmental Advisory Committee. It represents the voice of governments and intergovernmental organizations at ICANN's multi-stakeholder structure. The GAC was established in 1999, shortly after the creation of ICANN in 1998. And it has evolved significantly over the years, as we will discuss in the coming slides. If we go to the following slide, the GAC has 179 governments as members and 38 intergovernmental organizations as observers. When the GAC was first created, which is more than 20 years ago, it had only 24 members and 7 observers. So over the years, under the leadership of chairs from Australia, Malaysia, Latvia, Canada, Switzerland, and now Egypt, the GAC membership grew to be 179 members and 38 observers. Worth noting here that members and observers participate equally in all GAC discussions. So unlike what the term observer may imply, but members and observers, they participate equally. The only difference is that when members, only members are eligible to voting. And this takes place only when only during elections. Apart from that, we normally we don't vote during our discussions. And 1/3 of the current membership with voting rights constitutes a quorum at any meeting, which, as you may appreciate, turns to be a bit of a challenge now as we grow in number. So we need the 1/3 is already quite a number now. I read Glenn's question in the chat asking for some examples of observers. So we have WIPO as an observer, we have UNESCO as an observer, so intergovernmental organizations, they do participate as observers. We have also the World Bank. We have a long list of 38 observers. We have also the League of Arab States. Moving to the GAC leadership, the GAC leadership is composed of the chair and vice chairs, sometimes also shorthanded as CVC. So one more acronym. The chair is elected by GAC members, and the term of the chair is 2 years with a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. Current chair is myself from Egypt, and my term will be ending March 2023. For vice chairs, we have up to 5 vice chairs, also elected by GAC members. And the term of a vice chair is 1 year, again with a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. Current vice chairs are from Burkina Faso, Cook Islands, Niue, and Switzerland. So only 4 this time. But the incoming vice chairs, we managed to attract 5 excellent vice chairs as well from Burundi, India, Niue, Republic of Korea, and Sweden. And thank you, Glenn, for the question whether the chair rotates by region. Of course, to the extent possible, whether for the chair or the vice chairs, we try to bear in mind the geographical distribution. But again, it all depends on who volunteers to put their name down, and they have to have their support of their governments as well. To free them in terms of time, to give them the resources, and to support their nomination. So despite how much we would like to see the rotation taking place every time, again, sometimes we're restricted by the nominees. But yeah, as you can see, we do our best to have geographic representation for the chair and the vice chairs as well. And it's in the GAC operating principles that the geographic distribution should be considered. Question, ELAC has a liaison. Is this the same as an observer to the GAC? So do you mean within ELAC they have their own liaisons? I'm not sure about the ELAC setup, but the observers within the GAC, they have equally the same rights as members. But when we come to the elections of the leadership, they don't vote. This is the only difference. Apart from that, they lead our discussions, they lead working groups, they participate to GAC discussions, and they are equally participating as full members. And please, if I'm not addressing your question in full, please let me know. So moving to the following slide, as you may know, I'm sorry, I missed one slide. So next is the GAC support, and this is provided by 5 ICANN support staff. This may sound trivial to everyone, but in fact, in the past, GAC support passed through different models, including support provided voluntarily by a member country, and support provided in a hybrid format between ICANN support staff and an independent secretariat from outside ICANN. So now we settled on 5 excellent ICANN support staff, and support activities include organizing our meetings, providing substantive issue briefings to the GAC prior to the meetings, managing GAC website and email administration, liaising with ICANN org and other parts of the community, and coordinating operational matters, including the membership management, working group facilitation, and coordination of community travel support. If we go to the following slide.
Manal, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Siva has a question. He raised his hand. Siva?
I'm very sorry I missed the hand.
No, don't worry. Siva, you have the mic.
Thank you. Manal, you were talking about observers having equal rights as members to speak, or equal privileges as members to speak and participate. What about liaisons? Do they also speak, or do they simply observe and coordinate, and do they intervene? Can they influence opinions? For example, the liaison from ALAC to GAC, and in general about liaisons from one ACSO to another ACSO, not necessarily ALAC liaison to GAC, but every liaison from one ACSO to another ACSO. Do they speak, participate? Can they influence opinions, and or are they expected to be completely passive?
Thank you very much, Stephen. Apologies for not getting the question in the chat. So liaisons, we provide liaisons the opportunity to speak during GAC meetings, and normally they try to maintain an open channel between two parts of the community, be it GAC and ALAC or otherwise, and mainly, frankly, they don't participate in decision making per se, but they do participate in providing information related to their constituency in relation to the GAC discussion, for example. We give them the chance to provide information and to speak, and we have from the GAC side also assigned a focal point to coordinate with the liaisons from other parts of the community to the GAC. In the past, we had a liaison to the other parts of the community, but then some governments felt that we don't want to have someone speaking on our behalf in other parts or other fora, and the liaison, sometimes when he says something, it's taken as a GAC position. So this caused some confusion, and ever since we did not have liaisons to other parts of the community. But recently, since we needed someone to contact with our liaisons from other parts of the community to the GAC, we decided to have a point of contact to facilitate the job of the liaison. We have this with the ALAC, and we have this with the GNSO as well. So I hope I answered your question, Siva, and if not, please let me know, and if we can move to the following slide on work modalities. And as you may all know, the GAC meets face-to-face 3 times a year in conjunction with ICANN meetings. And we strive to provide GAC consensus advice. And by consensus advice, we mean here the practice of adopting decisions by general agreement in the absence of any formal objection. And GAC advice is usually conveyed in the form of a communique issued at the end of each GAC meeting. Of course, we sometimes also provide GAC advice in the form of a letter or overarching principles or an issue paper, but the most common form is the communique at the end of our meetings. All GAC meetings are held openly, meaning that other parts of the community are most welcome to attend, and the communique, the minutes, the transcription, and the recording are all posted online after the meeting. We have also internal working groups created as deemed necessary, and I'll leave this till later. We have more information on the GAC working groups. So if we can go to the following slide, and here we will be discussing the role of the GAC, shedding more light on the role of the GAC within ICANN and how GAC advice is being handled by the board. So if next slide, please.
I noticed that Siva had another hand up. As long as the question is related to the previous slide, Siva, or if it's something else, we could wait. But if it's related, so are you going to say your question?
Yeah, it's something unrelated, something new, and is it okay to ask that question?
I'll ask Manal. Is it okay for Siva to ask another question, Manal?
It's okay. So where do you see the hands? I'm just trying. I'm sorry, I keep missing the hands.
Oh no, it pops up on mine because I'm controlling the panel. So okay. you probably don't see it.
Okay.
Okay, Siva, go ahead.
Since 1999, government started taking part in ICANN and ICANN GAC. In the early period, in the first 10 years or so, the importance of ICANN was not so well understood by governments. So the GAC representatives nominated were sometimes in some countries were nominated just for the sake of complying with a request from ICANN. And recently, in the recent years, governments have started understanding the importance of DNS and the importance of the work that is done by GAC in ICANN. So as a result, in some cases, in some countries, the GAC members nominated are not fully integrated in the local governments, not fully integrated in the sense that they are not in a position to coordinate with different branches of governments, with different ministries in their local countries. Is GAC doing anything to generally make governments understand the importance of the role of a GAC representative nominated, and does GAC persuade governments to encourage the GAC members in their local governments to freely interact with different ministries or to elevate their status? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Siva, for the question. And since I already have a couple of slides on this, with your permission, if I can address your question a little bit later, just to avoid repetition.
Absolutely, at your convenience.
Okay. So moving to the role of the GAC, the key role of the GAC is to provide advice to ICANN board on issues of public policy, especially where there may be interaction between ICANN's activities or policies and national laws or international agreements. The GAC provides advice in accordance with its operating principles, and I try to provide as many links as I can so that you can dig further information if you wish. And the GAC advice is provided either upon ICANN's board request or on the GAC's own initiative. The GAC advice is duly taken into consideration by the board in accordance with the referenced section on the screen. And if we go to the following slide, we will find an extract of the relevant article of the bylaws, and it reads: the advice of the GAC on public policy matters shall be duly taken into account, both in the formulation and adoption of policies. In the event that the board determines to take an action that is not consistent with the GAC advice, it shall so inform the GAC and state the reasons why it decided not to follow that advice. So simply put, GAC advice is duly taken into account. The board, if the board decides not to follow, they have to inform the GAC and state the reason. But any governmental advisory committee advice approved by a full GAC consensus, again with the definition of what consensus here means, may only be rejected by a vote of no less than 60% of the board. And the GAC and the board will then try in good faith and in a timely and efficient manner to find a mutually acceptable solution. And the GAC will state whether any advice it gives to the board is GAC consensus advice. So this means that a consensus advice has its own weight when being handled. And if we go to the following slide, I tried to sketch a flow chart. It sometimes makes it easier for people when they visualize the process, which starts by the GAC providing advice to the board. If the board accepts the GAC advice, then the advice is followed and implemented, and that's it. If not, then the question becomes whether the GAC advice is a consensus GAC advice or not. If not, then the rejection means that they only state the reason. But if it is a consensus GAC advice, then it has to be rejected only if 60% or more of the board agrees to the rejection or votes for rejection. If less than 60%, then the advice is followed. If 60 or more, then again, they state the reason for the rejection, but the board and the GAC try to find a mutually acceptable solution. And this is where we say that the GAC advice triggers the bylaws if they are not followed, because they trigger a consultation process between the GAC and the board, trying to find a mutually acceptable solution or an agreed way forward, if you wish. I hope this is clear. And now if we go to the following slide and talking more about the working methods. As mentioned, the GAC sets its own GAC operating principles. The current operating principles date back to 2011, so it's a bit old. We had slightly amended the operating principles at ICANN 53 in Buenos Aires in 2015 to allow for 5 vice chairs. Previously, we had only 3. And then we slightly amended the operating principles again at ICANN 59 in Johannesburg in 2017 to allow for electronic voting, meaning that we can start the voting before the meeting online, of course using a secured platform and so on, but not necessarily using paper ballots. And now the overall operating principles are currently under review by the relevant GAC working group to make sure they accurately reflect how we work today. Next slide, please. And more information on GAC meetings. The GAC prepares for its meetings intersessionally. We hold a GAC-wide call to prepare and agree on the agenda. Support staff helps us to prepare GAC briefs on each topic that will be discussed during the meeting, and the briefs are circulated and posted online prior to the meeting. And all GAC meetings are open by default, and again, this is also an important evolution of how the GAC is working. In the past, the GAC used to hold its meeting in a closed setup, and they started to open up gradually, leaving only the communique drafting as a closed session. But now all meetings are open by default. And I always recall my first attempt to attend a GAC meeting, and I'm saying here attempt because it actually failed, as the room, I found the room locked with a key, so I couldn't get inside. Also, thanks to ICANN, we receive real-time interpretation in 6 UN languages plus Portuguese, again, changing from previous meetings in the years ago when the meetings were run only in English, and I think the real-time interpretation have encouraged more participation of those who feel more comfortable expressing themselves in their native language. There is also the real-time captioning. Remote participation was always an option, and all meetings are recorded, and the recordings are made available later. The GAC produces a communique, as we've said before, and everything from the communique to the minutes, transcription, and recording, they are all posted online after the meeting. I thought to insert the following slide highlighting how the virtual meetings affected the GAC work. So if we can go to the following slide. And here, like all other fora, the pandemic has forced our meetings to take place fully online. So since ICANN 67, all meetings were held virtually in the time zone of the country that is supposed to hold the meeting in order to favor citizens of the country. This meant more intersessional work to the GAC in order to reduce our online working hours or working days during the official ICANN meeting week, which ultimately also extended the footprint of GAC meetings. So we start preparations early, and instead of having a 1 week meeting, the preparations takes more of the intersessional time of the GAC members. But it also constituted a good opportunity for prioritization. We normally now try to really keep the agenda short, concise, and to the point, to matters that are a real priority to the GAC. And also, so the main challenge for the meeting is the communique drafting, I have to admit. And we very much miss our face-to-face interactions during the communique, body language and tactical poses when and as needed, because when the topic is very controversial or sensitive and the discussion becomes tense, We used to pause the meeting, give everyone a short break, and try to converge the different views off record. This is not the case anymore with virtual meetings, so it is quite a challenge. More challenges come from the technical aspect, where participants may be joining from places with bad infrastructure, bad weather conditions affecting their connectivity, or any other reasons that may cause technical issues during the meeting. Of course, there is also the time zone challenge, which is not an easy problem to solve, as it won't be possible to find a block of 8 hours that suits all time zones across the globe. And that made the GAC leadership provide daily briefs during the meeting week in order to bring participants who are challenged by the time zone up to speed, and so that they can engage in other sessions, knowing what they have missed. We also introduced a 72-hour period for communique review. So normally we issued the communique immediately after we finished its drafting, so the last day of the meeting week. But now we have agreed to allow for 72-hour period for participants, members and observers to make a final review of the communique in their own time zone. Two more things I would add here that are not on the slide. One challenge also that was brought up by participants is not being able to free themselves fully from their day jobs, and also the challenge of fully engaging new GAC members who have never met in person before. Worth noting that we had 121 new participants only between ICANN 65 in June 2019 and ICANN 70 in March 2021. So in less than 2 years, we had 121 new GAC participants. And as you may know, discussions are now focused on hybrid meetings and how we can equalize participation of on-site and online, or in-person and remote participants, particularly that looks like hybrid is the future. And I see Glenn has a question on the virtual meeting process. Please, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. This is quite insightful. You know, I think of NetMundell in Brazil a few years ago, and there was sort of a split, a sort of parties or balkanization of different countries aligning different ways in terms of influencing the NetMundell results. So do you find that the dynamics of the virtual meetings are more democratic, or do you find that less democratic in terms of participation? This whole virtual hybrid type of environment poses incredible challenges to what you normally do. Like you said, there's lots of conversations in the hall. There's probably give and take to influence a decision for getting people to come on board on policies. So do you find the dynamics of the virtual meetings being less vibrant or more vibrant, more inclusive, less inclusive? So do you I know it's been a couple of years now, so it's probably a little chance to compare the previous face-to-face to now. Do you see much of a change in terms of the process?
Thank you very much, Glenn. An excellent question. So I think it's a double-edged sword. So we see that there is an opportunity for discussing and reaching out one-on-one through the chat, which may have not even been the case in face-to-face, because in Zoom you can direct a question in private to a specific participant, which is a good thing, of course. But on the other hand, we don't have, as I said, the body language, the interaction, the poses we used to do, and we took parties with diverged views. We took the discussion offline. We normally try to resolve it, particularly if it's a sensitive issue. So we take it offline. We find a way forward, and then we come back, convene the meeting, and agree on the way forward with face saving to everyone. We're trying to enhance, we asked everyone to flag topics they would like to see in the communique early before the meeting, like 2 weeks before the meeting. Again, not everyone is abiding by this new setup yet, but we thought this, Glenn, because it might give people the chance to think things over before the meeting, flag any issues, and everything is just to facilitate the communique drafting when it comes to the drafting sessions in a virtual setup. So the early flagging also would give a chance to the members to consult nationally if they need to, and to support staff to dig any relevant information, so that when we come to communicate drafting, we know what did we say exactly on this specific issue previously, so that we're not contradicting, particularly with having new members all the time. So we need some institutional memory and some continuity. So I'm sorry if I'm not having a direct answer, but as I said, it has its pros and cons. Again, it is challenging with everyone remote, and as I said, with new faces that has never met in person before, it becomes even more challenging. But yeah, we continue to do our best. So, and if this answers your question, Glenn, we can go to the following slide and back to Siva's question on how to ensure that the government representatives are authorized and equipped to participate actively and take decisions during the meeting. And this where the high-level governmental meetings were designed for. So the high-level governmental meetings provide an opportunity to reaffirm the critical role that governments play at ICANN and enable a clearer understanding of that role, discuss current public policy issues and challenges at senior level, provide an opportunity for senior government officials to meet each other and meet ICANN executives, and also to reach out to governments who are not represented at the GAC. So ultimately, this helps us to make sure governments at a senior level know what we are doing at the GAC within ICANN, and provide their representatives with the necessary resources, facilitate their national consultations whenever needed, and provide them with the authority to speak during the meetings, as you said, Siva, and to share their national views during the meetings. If we go to the next slide, and this came out of the ATRT, the accountability, ICANN's accountability and transparency review teams 1 and 2. This was a recommendation by the review teams that we try to bring the work of the GAC to the senior officials of the governments. We had 4 such meetings, as was on the previous slide. I'm sorry, I switched slides from my end. I'm sorry. We had one in Toronto, 2012, and it's held every other year. So we had one in 2012, one in 2014, 16, 18, and we should have had one given this cadence in 2020, but due to the global pandemic, it did not allow this to happen. And now with the pandemic taking much longer than we expected, we are trying to think now of maybe a high-level session online rather than a high-level meeting. So before moving to the GAC working groups, Siva, I hope this answers your question on what we do to make sure GAC representatives participate effectively and are provided
Yes.
authority. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Okay. So if we move on to working groups, I know we have only 10 minutes left. And as I said, the working groups, first, the GAC has 3 levels of engagement internally within the GAC, bilaterally with other parts of the community, and also cross-community with everyone else. In addition to GAC discussions, we have the working groups. They focus on particular areas and they have their own terms of reference. The leads and participants come from volunteer GAC members and observers. Sometimes they have their own mailing lists, face-to-face meetings or conference calls. And some of them are ongoing, like the Underserved Regions Working Group or Public Safety Working Group, whereas others are, they have a specific lifespan and are closed as soon as they achieve their mandate. If we go to the following slide, this is example of the working groups we have. So the Underserved Regions Working Group, the Public Safety Working Group, Human Rights and International Law Working Group, and I'll spare you the description. You can read it on your own. If we go to the following slide, there is a focal group on next rounds of new GTLDs, and this is one type of a working group with a specific mission that would close after finishing and not an ongoing one. We have also GAC Universal Acceptance and Internationalized Domain Names. And as mentioned earlier, we have a working group on GAC Operating Principles that is looking into the evolution of the GAC Operating Principles. If we go to the following slide, and this is the GAC within the broader community. In the past, the GAC was criticized for working in a silo, being a black box to the community and providing GAC advice to the board at a very late stage of ICANN's policy development process, which comes after the community finishes its deliberations and submits their recommendations to the board for a decision. And hence, we worked on GAC early participation in the policy development process. So we have a board GAC interaction group facilitating the relationship between the GAC and the board. We have regular meetings with the board, regular meetings with other parts of the community. And the GAC also participates in the PDPs, the policy development processes, in any joint sessions or working groups, and also in specific reviews. If we go to the following slide, and this is another important development in the GAC journey, the AYANA Transition, which on its own needs a full session, but let's quickly say that the US government announced its intention to hand over the AYANA function stewardship from the US government to the global multi-stakeholder community, and this was in 2014. The handing over was finalized 2016, ending the special role or status of the US government, and the transition proposal was mandated to meet certain principles. I leave this to your own reading, but accordingly, ICANN orgs, instead of being accountable to the US government, this was replaced by its accountability to the community, or what we call now the empowered community. If we go to the following slide, you will see the 9 powers that the community is now empowered to do. So rejecting plans, approving changes in fundamental bylaws, removing individual board member, removing entire board, and so on. I'll leave this also to your own reading. And if we go to the following slide, it's the decisional participants. So the GAC decided to join the empowered community as a decisional participant, and accordingly, the GAC has formal obligations under the new bylaws to receive and initiate petitions, participate in the conduct of community discussions, and support, reject, or abstain from a collective exercise of one of the new powers. The community communicates its decisions through empowered community administration, which is made up of the chairs or representatives of the decisional participants. And the decisional participants here are the address supporting organization, country code names supporting organization, the GNSO, ELAC, and GAC. And the GAC is represented by its chair on this empowered community administration. Moving on to the general principles we decided to follow. So the GAC decided to adopt flexible approach and make changes as necessary because we were under time pressure. So we decided to have some guiding principles, and then we can take a detailed discussion later. We decided to have a clear, consistent, predictable, and transparent process in taking and documenting decisions, engage in issues with public policy implications, participate in early stages with a view to assisting resolution of the issue, and approach each case on its merit. So now, quick highlights on hot topics that are on the GAC's agenda. First, on the substance, we have the new GTLD subsequent procedures, which is related to the introduction of new GTLDs, how to introduce them, when, what's permitted and what's not. We also have the who is in data protection and the difficult balance between making necessary who is data available for legitimate use while maintaining data protection and privacy of personal data of users. And of course, this is in light of Europe's new framework for data protection, the Global Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which came into force in May 2018. There is the DNS abuse, and this has to do with combating DNS abuse that may threat consumers and the security, stability, resiliency of the internet infrastructure, and how to combat it while staying proportionate and without getting into content regulation. And finally, IGO rights protection mechanisms and how to grant the intergovernmental organizations protection for their known acronyms without negatively affecting the overall DNS market. On administrative and internal matters on the following slide, we had the hybrid ICANN meetings discussion, GAC vice chair elections, and this is already settled now, but we are trying to see how can we encourage more volunteering to the leadership positions within the GAC. We have the GAC operating principles review, and we have onboarding of new GAC members, again, given the high turnover of GAC representatives and the need for continuity within the GAC. So in the remaining minute, we have the following slide. It has several URLs on how governments can get involved. So please, if your government is not yet on the GAC, you can just share this with them. And with this, I thank you all. And I'll pause for any one last question.
Great, thank you, Manal. That was fantastic. It really gave me insights into GAC. And I know you used the term black box earlier. It's as being part of the at-large community. It's sort of a bit of an arm's length. I know you guys meet, but it's not like I attend the meetings, and so this has been quite insightful. In learning more about the machinations of how you guys operate. I believe Siva has another question. Go ahead, Siva. Did we scare Siva away?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had to switch on my microphone. It took time. This is a question on consensus, GAC consensus. How is consensus defined? Is it rigidly defined as 100% of votes from all members, or is it 100% of the votes of those present for the meeting, or is there any other intermediary or flexible definition of consensus, some sort of a deemed consensus from GAC with probably one or two minority opinions attached to that consensus opinion, or is it rigid? Is it completely rigid? I'll go on to ask a philosophical question. It's not very practical, but when the board requires GAC consensus, almost amounting to 100% votes for an advice to be binding, which can be acted upon or not acted upon by the board with 60% of the board vote. And there is a mismatch here. On one side, GAC is required to vote 100% and agree 100%, whereas on the other side, the board can only agree on or disagree on with only about 60%. This is for the long term, but right now the important question is about the rigidity of the definition of consensus. Is there something like a deemed consensus? Can GAC forward 90% of its opinion as deemed consensus and say that, okay, we consider it consensus?
Thank you very much, Siva. And as I mentioned earlier, the consensus is understood to mean here within the GAC practice. It is the practice of adopting decisions by general agreement in the absence of any formal objection. So this means that we don't have to get explicit confirmation or explicit support from each and every of our members. So silence is considered consensus. The only thing that breaks the consensus is formal objection. So if we receive any formal objection, then this is not consensus.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just confirming that this answers the question.
Okay, Siva, due to time.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. A lot more questions, and feel free to reach out. Manal has been gracious enough to provide the links and stuff. So if you want to get involved, please reach out to Manal. Again, thank you so much for this informative session, and I'm going to turn over to Alfredo.
Yes, this is Alfredo. Thank you, Manal, for the insights on how the Governmental Advisory Committee does its work within the ICANN ecosystem, and of course, dealing with internet governance and developing some advice to the board, which impacts all of us, end users especially, and other organizations within the internet ecosystem as well. Thank you so much for the details and the way that ICANN works, and I want to recommend each and every one of the participants to reach out to your governments if they don't have any representative within the GAC, because this is a great scenario to have input from the governments and sort of try to reach some common ground in terms of having the internet available for every citizen within each of the countries. So thank you, Manal. And thank you all for participating or watching the recording afterwards and submitting your comments and questions. Remember the survey for this session, and we look forward to seeing you after the holidays. So until January 10th, 2022, we'll wish you all a great festivities. And until then, bye.
Okay. Thank you all. See you in the next meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.